All right, I will call to order the October 18th, 2022 meeting of Ag and Rural Affairs. The first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the September 20th meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or deletions?
Also moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is public appearances for non-agenda items. Is there anyone here to speak on any items that are not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda review. Any changes to the agenda? No? Okay. Hey, Roger. Agenda items 5A and 5B will kind of take together. This is a rezone request and a certified survey map request by the leases. We do have Jim Lease registering to speak on this, and I think why don't we just start out with having Jim come up and tell us, what's going on, what the plan is, and then we'll get a staff report on this.
Okay. Are you comfortable?
Okay.
We were just looking to divide 1861 Schuster Road into 3 separate lots. One of them, that would be the smallest of the 3 lots, has the buildings on it, and the other 2 is the remainder of the east side property, and the 3rd lot is the entirety that's on the west side of 14.
Okay. And what's the purpose for dividing the property?
So my mother has passed away. I'm going to purchase the smaller lot with the house on it. And we have a farmer that's purchasing the acreage on the east side. And the trust is going to hang on to the bigger lot on the west side for now.
Okay. Great. Thanks. Any questions for Jim? Okay. Let's go with the staff report then.
Okay, so as Mr. Lease noted, this is a rezone request and a certified survey request. It's taking some unplatted lands on both sides of Highway 14. Currently, all the lands are zoned AX. And you know what, if you can give me the share screen, this might be helpful. So on each side of 14, both sides were AX, and we're doing a farm consolidation. There is no additional lands to be, no additional construction or no claims to be used. What we'll do is, and I just realized that, there'll be an outlet to the west, and that will remain zoned AX, so exclusive agriculture. The lot to the north, which would be lot 1, will be rezoned to AS because it is less than the required 35 acres for AX. And then the parcel to the south there would be zoned RR. There are still 2 claims attached to this farm. We will ask Mr. Lease to assign both of those claims to Lot 2. So staff does recommend approval. For the rezone, we recommend, the conditions are that, for the rezone, the conditions are no other permit or approval is waived, council approval of the certified survey, and shall comply with all aspects of the respective zoning districts. For the certified survey, staff recommends the following conditions. No other permit is waived, council approval of the rezone. We will need concurrences from the utilities, and applicant shall record an affidavit of record assigning the 2 claims to Lot 2 with no claims to Lot 1 or Outlot 1. The applicant shall also record a right to farm notice, and then just to double check there isn't any issues with fire or public works. So we recommend approval of both the rezone and the CSM.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Deanna, can you clarify? We've got two versions of the certified survey map. One,
Yeah, that was my fault. That was an older one. The second page is just the rezone, and I grabbed an older version of the certified survey. So where you see the red text, that's not the CSM, that's just our rezone map. Lot 3, the parcel on the west side of 14 cannot be a lot. It doesn't have direct access to any roads. It'll have to be an outlot at this time.
okay, got it.
I
So
have a
there
few
is lot
copies of
1,
the
lot
more
2, and
detailed-
outlot 1.
Yep, there's just lot 1, lot 2, outlot to the west.
Okay. And so then, why are the splits being assigned to lot 2?
That's what Jim and I talked about. I guess it doesn't have to be that way. I was suggesting that so we can make sure that we maintain as much as the acreage that is good for farming. As in lot 1, instead of cutting out a piece in lot 1, maintain the integrity of the entire lot 1. And then because lot 2 is kind of a skinny shape anyways, it might lend itself better, just from a planning side, for those two claims, was my thinking.
Okay, so if they were to be used in the future, then lot 2 would need to be subdivided.
Oh, yes, it would, yep. All we're doing at this point would be signing and recording an affidavit to assign those claims to that lot.
Okay. And you're good with that, Jim? You're good with all that structure?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. Further questions?
No, I have none. I got it answered. I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, so we've got the rezone and then separately the CSM. So we're gonna start
Yep,
with the
has to
rezone.
be two separate ones.
Make a motion for the rezone?
And with 3 conditions as noted.
Yes.
Second.
There is a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. And then the CSM.
I will make the motion to approve the CSM with the conditions. I'll make the motion to approve the CSM. Second. With the conditions noted.
7 conditions noted.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Two splits in there, that's a cool move. I've never seen that done before.
All right, the next item on the agenda, item 5C, is a conditional use request 2476-22 by Eric Udelhoffen, agent for One Energy Development, to obtain conditional use approval to allow a solar energy generation project off Irish Lane. We have 3 registrants on this item, 2 registering only in support. That would be Peter Murphy, 834 East Washington in Madison with One Energy Renewables, and Sarah Glover at 7771 Riverside Road in Verona, also with One Energy Renewables, again, both registering in favor. Then Eric Udelhoffen wishes to speak on the matter. So, Eric, floor is yours.
Thanks for your time today. Appreciate it. My name is, I'm going to pull this up here in a slideshow. There we go. My name is Eric Udelhoffen. I work for One Energy Renewables based out of our Madison office. We are an independent developer of community scale solar energy projects and started the Madison office back in 2015. and have at this point a team of 17 folks that are focused on developing, engineering, and constructing projects throughout the Midwest. This is just a map of the projects that we've developed that have been constructed out of our Madison office. They're mostly in western Wisconsin and southeast Minnesota, but we've got a handful in northern Wisconsin and northern Illinois, and one in Iowa as well. There are 25 projects totaling 75 megawatts and produce roughly enough electricity for 20,000 Midwestern homes. Closer to home here, our first project that we worked on in Dane County was the Maury Field Solar Project, which is a 5 megawatt site that we developed and that MG&E owns, and it's part of their shared solar program. This was the first community scale solar project in Dane County. It's kind of on the western extent of Middleton, right by the airport. And through this project, we got to know MG&E and met the team there, understood kind of what they were looking for in terms of projects. And the TIDO project, which we're proposing here in Fitchburg, would be an expansion of that same program. I've got a little diagram from MG&E's website, but essentially the shared solar program allows any MG&E customer that's a residential or a small business customer to purchase a portion of their electricity from this project and basically support a local community solar project through their without any change in their electrical service. So it's a great program. It's been really popular, and the existing program has sold out, and so MG&E is looking to expand that through the TIDO project. One of the things that we acknowledge as a solar developer is that solar does use agricultural land. I mean, most of our projects are sited on agricultural land in rural areas. But I think it is easy to perceive that there's going to be an enormous amount of land that would be required to produce solar energy for the state. Renew Wisconsin has done a great analysis, and they've got I've included a link at the bottom of this, but it's on their website. Basically, they've looked at the average efficiency of a solar project in Wisconsin, and it would require roughly 0.5% of Wisconsin's ag land to produce half of the state's electricity. And that's roughly the equivalent of how much land is enrolled in CRP currently. So just to put in context, and that's using today's technology. I will say that for each acre of land that we're, for projects we're building next year, we're producing about 30% more energy than we were in 2017 when I started with the Middleton project. And that's due to increases in panel efficiency and the improvements in racking and also just larger format panels. Just to give a sense for site selection criteria, why we are looking at this site in particular, the kind of foundation is these projects tie into existing electrical infrastructure. They don't require new high voltage electric lines to be built, but the lines that they tie into need to be the appropriate voltage, and they need to have the carrying capacity for the size project that you're proposing. And then the substation that line connects to also similarly needs to have adequate capacity and load to be able to accommodate that project without upgrades. So that's kind of the foundation when we're looking at sites. That's probably the most important factor. From there, then we're looking for a site that's suitable from a construction standpoint, and we need to be able to build a project that's going to be efficient and cost-effective to construct. So that takes into account slope, depth to bedrock, wetlands that we may need to avoid, and any kind of site constraint that would limit our ability to build a very efficient site. And then the last component is an interested landowner, so someone who's willing to host that project for a long duration of time. We're typically designing all of the components of a site to exist for 40 years. And so it's a long commitment. We have the leases set up to be shorter duration initially with options to extend. But when we're choosing how thick the galvanization is on the pilings, and we're choosing any number of engineering factors that go into the longevity, we hope that we're designing that system to last for 40 years. So finding someone a farmer or a landowner who is willing to sign up to that duration of a deal and lease out their property is, again, that's a fundamental thing that we need to get right from the outset. Once we get those three components together, we've got the three main ingredients we need for a project to be successful. And then that there needs to be a way for that electricity to be sold. So that's where MG&E and the shared solar program came into this equation to make the project able to come to where it is now, where we're presenting it to you. So the project itself is 6 megawatts. The project that we built at Maury Field is 5 megawatts. O'Brien Fields, I believe, is 20. So just to put in context, this is in the range of what we would consider a community scale project. It's roughly 30 acres within the fence, and it would be expected to produce around 12 million kilowatt hours per year, which is enough electricity for 1,180 average Wisconsin households. The project is designed to tie into the existing three-phase line along Irish Lane south of the site. And if you are looking at this site from Irish Lane, you can see in the near distance there's a high voltage transmission line that basically defines the south end of the project. This project's not tying into that line, but we can't build any facilities within that easement. So the project is proposed to be just north of that transmission easement. And then it's basically on the south, mostly the south-facing slope of the hill that's behind that, or to the north of that high-voltage transmission line, but also somewhat on the west-facing slope. The access drive is proposed to come in off Irish Lane in the southeast corner, and comes in and basically tries to stay away from the adjacent residence there, while avoiding the mature trees within that wooded area, and then hugs along the eastern edge of the site up until it goes underneath that high voltage transmission line, and then into where the panels would be located north of the transmission line. The basic components of the project are very similar to O'Brien Fields, with a key difference in that the panels and the racking arrangement are what's called one-up tracking. So you can see here there's one panel mounted on the torque tube, whereas O'Brien Fields has two panels straddling that torque tube. So the O'Brien Fields project, the panels extend higher in the air, and the pilings extend further out of the ground. Our pilings for this project would extend out of the ground roughly 5.5 feet, and the panels at their maximum extent would be roughly 7.5 to 8 feet. That's the key difference. The other elements of the project are fairly similar. The panels are bifacial, which is another element that makes them more productive than the panels we were using with Maury Field and with our early projects in Wisconsin. And that basically just means they absorb energy from the bottom as well as the top. So in the winter, especially when there's snow on the ground, they produce a significant amount more energy than they would if they were monofacial, the typical panels that we had been using previously. We're proposing an ag-style perimeter fence, similar to what's shown in the photo here, and is used at O'Brien Fields as well. And I guess one other comment on that perimeter fence, we are in conversations with a sheep grazer about possibly planting the site to pasture grass, and then grazing that with sheep. So this type of perimeter fence would be installed with a narrow gauge mesh at the bottom. And then we always try to make sure with our fencing contractors that that's really tight to the ground, to make sure that if it were grazed, there wouldn't be ability for predators to get in to that fence. The inverters that we're planning to use, this is another difference, I guess, between this project and the O'Brien Fields. O'Brien Fields had central inverters, which are quite a bit larger, and they set on a concrete pad. Our inverters for this project are called string inverters. They're smaller, and they're mounted on pilings that look very similar to the pilings that we're using for the rest of the project. So the only concrete pad that we're planning is for the transformer and the switchgear, and that would look similar to the picture on the right. It's a transformer like what you'd see at a large department store. But other than that, there's basically just gravel access drives and then a gravel laydown yard, and the rest of the equipment is mounted on driven steel pilings. The permanent vegetation we're proposing is either a pollinator-friendly meadow or sheep pasture. We typically try to install a pollinator meadow as a baseline, unless we're able to find someone that is interested and willing to graze the site, in which case we pivot that to a pasture mix that has pollinator plants in it, but is more oriented towards having healthy forage for the sheep throughout the growing season. And the project, as I mentioned earlier, would contribute to grid resilience and reliability, serve local MG&E customers, reduce the need for electricity to be imported from outside the community, and allow the system, if there are outages, to be brought back online more quickly than if there was not that system generating within the area. We've got my contact information here, but would love to respond to any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Eric. Couple of questions. You stated that this is planned to be a 40-year project. Do the panels that you're putting in and the other equipment, are they anticipated to last 40 years, or would they be presumed to have to be replaced at some point during that time?
The panels are warranted 30 years, but and I think this is pretty standard in the industry, believe that they'll continue operating past the warranty period. Like, you figure out 100,000 mile warranty on your powertrain of your car. Hopefully you're still going to get some life out of that at the end. So we anticipate that they would still have life in them at the end of that period, and we try to keep them running as long as possible. So our baseline plan is to design everything else within the system to last 40 years, to leave that 10-year window at the end of the warranty period of the panels. The rest of the equipment is, the racking is all steel, and we choose the galvanization to a thickness that would, where we're expecting a 40-year lifespan. The wiring is all, buried in conduit and expected to last that long. The transformers have a 50-year design life typically. We're very focused on making sure that these projects are really well built and able to operate for that full duration.
At about what point do you hit break even on, through energy production, looking at the cost of the project?
So you mean from a financial standpoint,
Yeah.
not an energy production standpoint?
Right, yeah.
So I would say solar is it's not a really lucrative type of project, but it's very consistent and reliable. So the majority of investment, and this one's different because the project will actually be owned by MG&E and rate-based, or not rate base, but it will be funded through the shared solar program. So all the economics are contained within that program. But like typical solar projects that are owned by investors, they're owned by large institutional investors that are looking for low return, low risk type investments. So usually you would hear return periods of like 15 to 18 years for a payback period, but it's a 40-year asset, and it's the costs are really manageable, and you can anticipate them well. The warranty periods are strong. So it's not knock your socks off types of returns. It's predictable and consistent and long-term.
Okay. And one other quick question that I have for you. If you go the pollinator meadow route for the plantings, how is that maintained? Does that need to be burned off every so often? Is that even possible with the panels there, or how do you maintain basically a prairie without fire?
Great question. So if it is seeded to a pollinator pasture, a pollinator prairie, it's really important to work with a contractor for like a 5-year duration who's responsible for both the seeding and then the maintenance of that and the establishment, and that they're giving you some guarantees of certain establishment and benchmarks over time. The basic parameters are you've got to pay attention to what the site is before. So this year it's in beans, which is a perfect precursor to putting in prairie, because there's not as persistent of herbicides as with corn. And also then there's less stubble and things in the field. So that's a good baseline to be putting prairie into. Then you got to seed it at the right time of year and make sure that you get good seed soil contact and all those things. So the contractors we use for that are really experienced with doing this within solar facilities. But then during the operations period, the first year they're typically mowing 3 times, and then also the people that mow know how to identify plants, and if there are problem species that are going to spread and become an issue long term, they'll do spot treatment of herbicide of those with a backpack sprayer, and that's typical of the first 3 years. So you're doing like a high mowing 2 to 3 times a summer, depending on the vegetation growth. And then spot treatment of invasives that may spread. Then in the years 4 and 5, it's 1 to 2 mowings a year, and then years 6 and beyond, the hope is you're just mowing once a year in the late summer, early fall, to basically make sure that no woody species get established, and that would mimic the burn, because we can't burn the area, but if you do one complete short mow late in the year, and especially if you can take that vegetation off, like if you can hay it, that's best case scenario, but that's pretty challenging. So usually just mow it.
Okay, thanks. Other questions? Raj?
Do you have plans for any planting of any shrubs, trees, or something for screening this area from the residential area?
We do not have baseline plans for screening shrubs. Our shrubs are evergreens on this site. Our typical baseline is if the project's within 250 feet of neighboring residents, we will just propose that right out of the gate. But given the setback of the project from Irish Lane and the homes that are along Irish Lane, and then also to the east of the site, and the distance, we have not proposed that in the baseline plan. We have spoken with Deanna and expect to maintain as many trees as we can within the pathway of the driveway. And if we do have to remove any trees, that we would commit to replace them on an inch-for-inch basis. But yeah, we don't have kind of screenings around the outside.
I've got some questions. We'll just go down the line. I've got some questions. If you're going to go with the shape, I understand the woven wire is the standard product, but I farmed for a lot of years, and a barbed wire at the bottom
Barbed wire at the bottom, okay.
is recommended, will help you a lot, and it'll be much better for predators and things.
Okay,
Just an FYI for you guys,
yeah.
because I farmed for all of my life, so.
Do you put it outside of, like, you put the?
Right, that goes down first, and the woven wire goes next.
Oh, okay, all right.
But, especially because you have, the O'Brien is a little closer in, but you're getting out into the more rural area, and you're going to have some, especially if you do have sheep, you'll be inviting some other predators that like to eat sheep.
Sure,
Anyway,
appreciate that.
if you do, will sheep, the way you build this, will sheep be able to graze that and not cause any damage? Sheep or goats? Goats are going to be a little more gnawing.
Yeah, we steer clear of goats, but sheep do a great job of vegetation maintenance within the site. Yeah, we make a couple of design changes to when we are planning to use sheep. Like we'll put in a small interior fence around the electrical pad,
Right.
and then carry the conduit a little bit higher when wires are coming out of the ground. But other than that, we don't have to make a lot of changes, and the sheep really appreciate the shade, especially in the summer. So it works quite well to graze sheep.
If you were to pasture, if you were to offer that to a farmer for pasture for sheep, what time frame? How many months a year? What's your time frame that you would? Because they'll have to be rotated. Sheep are historically, I think most people know that because of their palate, they can kill the grasses if they're not rotated. So, who would be responsible for that, and how would you have some interior fences if you went that route?
Yeah, we would need to sign a vegetation MG&E, because they're the long-term owner-operator, would need to sign a vegetation maintenance agreement or something similar with a farmer to graze it. We've actually, at the community meeting for this project, one of the neighbors reached out, and we've had some conversations, and actually just met with him again, and he's interested in potentially grazing it.
Great.
But the duration of time, once the pasture, the first year we'd let get established and not graze it, but then starting in the second year, it would be most of the summer. I mean, most of the other sites that we have, we're doing high stocking rates for short duration and then moving them around like you're describing and then pulling them off. So it's not like they're there for the whole summer. But then, so, they would, with a site of this size, depending on how many sheep someone had, probably would be either leaving them on site and rotating them every 3 or 4 days, and then setting up
Paddocks.
probably 10 or more paddocks, because they'd be about 3 acres each, with temporary electric fence, and possibly some permanent lower fencing, internal fencing, so that you don't have to move as much.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think either it would be they'd be out there the whole summer and moved around a lot, or they'd come in for short durations, like 3 or 4 times, to kind of mimic what the mowing would be.
Yeah, because depending how you do it, you got to provide water too. So,
Yeah.
that, and usually when you lay the paddocks out, the water's in a center location where you spin off 4 or 6 sites off of that center water, and that's usually typically how they're laid out. So, what's the time frame for the build if you get your approvals?
If everything goes smoothly, the plan is to build it next summer, starting construction in May, and then having the site operational by the end of next year.
Okay. The amount of land that's, you said is 30 acres. The owner that you're working with, is that the total acreage, or what's the remainder acreage that?
Yeah, the total parcels are 80 acres roughly, between the two owners, brother and sister. The farmed acreage is, I think, roughly 60.
Okay.
So it's about half of the tillable.
Okay. And how close are you to the Maple Avenue neighborhood? That's the ones to the east. That's the Maple Avenue, the cluster homes that's between Irish and Maple Avenue.
I think the setback is, I think it's roughly 600 feet from the nearest home. That's along Irish Lane, just to the east of the driveway location.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's all. If you do, is there any sheep shelter that you would put on that site? Or would the panelists provide enough?
Usually the panels provide enough, although there's still a lot, there would be a lot of details to work out on that if we were able to work with the neighbor. I think it would, if they're going to stay out there the whole summer and be moved around, it would probably be smart to have a
Temporary shelter?
temporary shelter, yeah.
Yeah, okay. They made some good ones, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, I have a few questions on, you mentioned the panel efficiency has been improved. And what has that efficiency improvement been? I mean, excuse me, over your existing panels that you started with?
Yeah, so these panels are 540 watt panels on the front side. So basically, midday when they're under full sun, the front side is producing 540 watts of output, and then the rear side is producing additional wattage depending on how much is reflecting off the ground. But
Is
typically,
that's basically for our climate, more for the snow cover, that it's a reflection off the,
yeah, there's just like ambient light and reflection off the ground does boost production even in summer a little bit, but it's most of the boost is in the winter.
that's what I assumed.
Yeah, but even just the panels themselves being 540 watt, the panels we used at Maury Field were 390 watt, and they were a little bit smaller, but not much. So the amount of racking was the same, and it was a 390 versus a 540 watt panel. So the space efficiency per unit of output of electricity has improved pretty significantly just in that.
well, yeah, it does make sense. I mean, I cross-country skied a lot in the wintertime, and you better wear some kind of protection or you'll get burned.
Yeah, right. Yeah, in this area.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyhow, then I have another question on the construction on it. These are driven in the ground.
Yep.
I mean, there's no drilling.
Right.
And have you had, in our climate, do you have panels up by Black River Falls, I think, too?
I do. Yeah, we worked on those projects last year. Yep.
Yeah, as far as any slope goes, where there is any kind of water running around those posts, do you have any maintenance with them lifting up out of the ground with the frost?
No, frost heave is that's the governing design factor for projects in the upper Midwest here.
Yeah.
We're basically we've done a soil boring analysis and then driven test pilings here, and what basically drives how deep the panel or the pilings need to be embedded is the ad freeze load that would be exerted in summer from a freezing ground and a buckle.
Sure.
And so it depends on the soil type. Those ones in Black River, it's really sandy up there.
Right.
And so the frost penetrates really deeply, and there's a lot of that ad freeze lift. So some of those pilings are
that
super
kind of
deep.
leads me to the question of, this is a variety of some soil conditions, and if there's any type of clay or anything that would cause them to heave up, but that's more on you for maintenance, huh?
Yeah, I mean so we have to design within each soil type. There's a different foundation design, and that we have a structural engineer review all the soil borings and then the pile load tests, which are basically we drive a piling that's similar to what we expect to drive, and then exert a pull force on it and side-to-side forces on it, and all that data is used to inform our foundation design. So typically clay leads to shallower. We don't need to embed as deeply as sand, but there's a lot of other factors that go in, like what the skin friction is, like how much it's going to resist the uplift. And this stuff gets way beyond me, but that is a major consideration when we're designing the foundation.
So you're almost by pole doing the,
Yeah, I mean,
if the geographically changes throughout the project, I
Yeah.
imagine you.
and a lot of times with sites, like there's not that big of a difference between the best and the worst case. So we'll design for the worst case and use it across the board because it's more of a use the deepest embedment across the board so we don't have to mess around with making sure you're using the right one in each location. But
Have you got any history on any decommission of these panels, of the projects? I mean,
no, the large-scale solar industry, I mean, the first projects that were installed in California are still operating, so there's not really a lot of precedent for the decommissioning of these projects in mass. That said, there have been a lot of decommissioning studies done to figure out how much it would cost to remove everything. And typically those find that during the first 15 years, the salvage value of the equipment exceeds the decommissioning expense. And then in about year 15, the decommissioning expense starts to exceed the salvage value of the equipment. And so that's when typically it kind of flips. And if you need to have a bond to cover decommissioning, it usually starts in those out years. We do, with our projects, there will be some panels that are damaged in shipping or in installation. And so those damaged panels we need to figure out something to do with. And there is a growing number of similar projects that are trying to figure out what to do with panels that are not operational. And I was really happy to discover that last year, recycler in the Twin Cities area started accepting panels and recycling panels. So now, and they actually send a truck around Wisconsin every month. And so you tell them when you have a pallet ready for them and they'll come pick it up, and it's pretty cost effective. And they can recycle like 97% of the equipment or of the materials in a panel. So
well, I guess my question would be more geared toward the agricultural land.
Sure.
As far as, taking it back to existing conditions.
Yeah, we have
I don't know who's in charge of the oversight on that? But.
Yeah, I mean, our lease agreement that we negotiated with the landowner that will transition to MG&E when they take ownership of the project requires the company to decommission the facility at the end of the lease period, or if the project is not operational for more than 6 months. So there is an obligation of the project owner to decommission the site and get it back to farmable condition either at the end of the lease term or if it stops operating.
Well, or I was thinking if there was a owner change, if it was sold or there was some change there, I imagine it's transferable. Who does the oversight on?
You mean if the ownership of the land changes or the ownership? Yeah.
Yeah.
The lease
Say they don't want to continue with the project. I don't know if I'm sure there's an agreement that has to be met.
Yeah, I mean, when we're looking for landowner partners that want to host the site, that's the key thing for them is, are you willing to make this long-term commitment? Because if we're going to invest in building the project there, we need to make sure that we can operate it for the full expected life. So if the landowner would ever want to sell the parcel, the lease would run with the land to the new owner.
And then, back on the grazing underneath it, any issues with stray voltage? I know you mentioned you'd fence around where the transformers and switch gear are, but.
Yeah, these projects are, so we have to get permits from the Department of Safety and Professional Services. They have to approve the design of the system and then come inspect it and also verify that it's installed per the plans. The main thing that they're looking for is adequate grounding that we've, and the pilings are actually all integrated to the grounding system. So the solar projects are extremely well grounded, probably like they will improve stray voltage conditions in almost anywhere that they're installed because of how well grounded they are. So we've never had any issues with stray voltage. And there's a couple different checks and balances, both with the DSPS, but then also the utility will run stray voltage tests on their lines to make sure that there's none produced in the area.
There's probably more stray voltage on those towers that go.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Neighborhood comments, I know you reached out to a lot of neighbors there. Did you get good feedback or?
We sent a letter out to all the folks within the same distance of the parcel that would be notified for the conditional use permit hearing. And we did receive a couple of phone calls, mostly just wondering exactly where the project would be located. And I think there was a little bit of confusion. Some folks thought it was going to be south of Irish Lane. That was mostly just, it was kind of clarifying conversations, and they were like, oh, it's north of the High Line. Okay. I'm not too concerned about it.
It seems like it's a ways away. It's just that the drive or the access is probably the closest thing to them.
Yeah, we did. And then when we had the in-person community meeting at the library, the only neighbor that came to that was the neighbor we're talking to about the grazing, who owns the farm northwest of this parcel.
Good. That's all I got.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I've got one question. Go ahead, Randy.
Oh, okay. Majority of my questions have been answered, but on the decommission, though the girders or pilings, they can be. I think that was a point that was made on the O'Brien project, is that those girders pilings could be pulled out.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just a theory. This is something that you truly believe can be done at 40 years, once the life of expectancy has outlived or the plan changes. Is that true?
Yeah, actually, this project here in the lower left is in Cashton, Wisconsin, and we built that in 2018. It was actually H&H Solar, who's right on the edge of Fitchburg and Madison, built the project. And they had a surveyor come out and stake the pile locations. And they staked two of them wrong. So they drove pilings where they weren't supposed to be. And our engineer was, going around doing a check, and he was like, these are wrong. So they basically, at the top of them, there's bolts that come in to hold that housing. So there's holes that accept the bolts.
Oh.
They put a strap on that with a lull.
Sure.
And they pulled those right out. And
Okay.
it was easier than I would have expected.
So you had some practice here, or I should say there isn't just theory. So
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
And you already pulled up the other slide. The actual profile, you spoke to the profile. It appears to be a much lower profile than what's out at the O'Briens. What kind of difference are we talking?
Yeah, let's see.
It was behind the.
This is probably the best one
Yeah, I
to
would agree.
show it. The pilings will be sticking out of the ground 5 to 5.5 feet, and then the torque tube is what sets on top of the pilings.
Mm-hmm.
So that's got a little bit of gap, and then there's a little gap between that and the panels. So the panels would be at roughly 6 feet tall when they're flat midday.
Sure.
And then at full extent, it's 7.5 to 8 feet. So
Okay.
compared to O'Brien Fields, I think those ones are up to 12 feet at the maximum extent.
Okay.
So it is, quite a bit lower profile. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably for the better. So, yeah, at least for the neighbors.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Dan, maybe you can help with this question, or Randy. Is Fitchburg in a position to receive some service benefits from this project?
I know a little bit. So with the O'Brien solar farm, The city is a participant in the shared program. I don't know exactly how much. And so we haven't had any discussions with MG&E, but certainly the city could explore participating, if this one is approved, to participate with this one in the shared program. It's possible.
Okay, good. One other observation, we all watched the O'Brien project with a lot of enthusiasm. And one of the things just we've all talked about, I don't know anybody that hasn't talked about, but, we have the idea that, it follows the sun and it follows it back. And then you'd have some that are out of sync, so everybody, well, what's going on? What has been your experience and what do you have in your proposal or your construction to eliminate that type of a thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the solar industry in the Midwest is relatively new. These trackers are, the first projects that we built in the Midwest were fixed tilt facing south in 2017, 2018, and then trackers became more prevalent in 2018 and 2019. But there have been now several iterations of design changes to make these trackers more resilient to the northern climates that we are in. I think the specific issue at those O'Brien Fields one is there are quite short units that are controlled by a motor. So it's like I think 100 feet, and by 2 panels high that's its own motor, and then there's another motor. So there's a huge number of motors for that site, and if one of them has an issue, then it's not going to track correctly. What I think has been happening is some of those have a little bit of moisture getting into the control panel, and so then it fails and then it doesn't track correctly. This site is planned to be built with what's called ATI tracking, which is the tracker manufacturer that has the highest uptime or the highest tracking percentage of the year. It's over 99% of the year. That's what this one is near Cashton. We've built a lot of projects with them and have really good experience with them. The main thing that they do that's different is they consolidate the motors. I think this site would have 12 motors, and each motor is connected to the other rows by a drive shaft, which then has a geared drive to each individual row. So each motor is quite a bit larger and more robust and much more of a sturdy motor. And then you've basically got like a PTO shaft and a power and a gear system at each row. So that's I think that's what sets this one apart, and will be, I think you'll notice that this site will be tracking the sun at a much higher percentage of the time than the O'Brien Field site. And that's definitely something MG&E was very focused on, is making sure that our plan for the tracker vendor is well vetted, and they've looked into that, because I think they've had mixed experience they've got 4 projects now throughout Dane County that they're operating. And so, the gentleman who's in charge of that hates to have any of those rows not tracking. So, like I do too. I mean, it just bothers you to see them not producing at their maximum level. So,
A rogue solar panel.
yeah.
If it were decommissioned, you mentioned that there's just the only concrete is poured under the transformer site. And I understand, because I was in the utility industry for many, many years, that the poles can be pulled out with very little soil disruption. The cables, the burying the cables is a little, there's some of that will be done, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And if that had to be decommissioned, is that then removed and soil brought in to make sure that it's ag farmable again?
Yeah, the process that we follow when we're digging the trench and decommissioning will be similar in that, like when when the trench is being dug, we pull the topsoil first and stockpile it, and then dig the subsoil and separate that, and then make sure that the subsoil goes in. After we lay the conduit, subsoil goes in first, topsoil is on top. We need to do that for the electrical parameters that we're designing to are the subsoil, and we're sizing wire and everything. But also we want that site to be able to become fully vegetated as soon as we can so that we can release our stormwater permit. So that's like at installation, that's the process we follow. But then when we're removing it, the lease has a commitment that the property will be returned to farmable condition. And that would, include same thing with the top. We want there to be topsoil. So when they're pulling that wire out, they just go with a mini X, scrape that off first, stockpile it. And that wire, it'll still be pretty valuable. It's copper. It'll be pretty valuable at the end. So it'll be, pretty worthwhile to make sure that gets out of there.
Understand.
But it is a commitment in the lease as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, one other question. And this may be Deanna that can answer this. How is the zoning for a solar field in a rural agricultural, which is AX? Does that zoning stay AX, or how is that handled?
Sure thing. So actually, this 80 acres is currently zoned AT, so transitional agriculture. The requirements for AT is exactly the same as AX. And in both of those zoning districts, this kind of utility, wind farm, solar farm is a conditional use. And that's why this project is before you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
No rezoning.
No, that's very good. How is it taxed?
I don't know that, sir.
That was my question.
Yeah. I will make a note and see if we can get some information.
Because the reason I'm asking that question, if you decide to go with the sheep, then that's a pasture, which falls under the agricultural taxation program. So it would be very beneficial if you can make that work, as far as your tax structure, I believe.
I would need to do some checking on it.
That question may come up at Plan Commission tonight too, so if it's possible to get an answer prior to that, which perhaps it won't be, that would be great.
I will try.
All right, one quick question. I don't understand, the tree removal shall be replaced with native trees inch for inch. What does that mean, or how does the math work on that?
Well, that is one of the conditions that I have placed here. The road, along Irish Lane, there's a wetland, and then trees and shrubs. It's pretty grown up in there. And I've asked Eric, as the road is put in, as their gravel roadway is put in, that they avoid trees if possible. And if not, I've asked him to replace, so it's, say, for example, a 16-inch tree has to be taken out. I've asked him to replace that with maybe 4-inch trees.
So a 16-inch tree, you're talking about circumference?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
It's diameter.
Oh, okay, yes, diameter, yeah.
All right. Okay, or 61-inch trees. I'm just trying to understand the math on this.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Yeah, okay. There were some other public comments that came in via email. I think there were 28.
I believe
that
you are
right?
correct, sir.
And 27 out of 28 of those were in favor of this project, and the 28th was against it. And the concerns that were raised basically had to do with whether long-term solar is really a solution to the problems that we're dealing with on a national basis, and then the various problems with lithium for batteries, are we going in a direction that actually works from an ecological standpoint? Now, I don't think any of us know the answer to that question. I certainly wish I did. I did look into some of the information that, there was a link to some information there, and it was interesting because it was not coming from someone, at least it did not appear to be coming from someone in the petroleum industry. It appeared to be coming from someone who was an actual ecologist and was saying, these things aren't really all that well thought out. Are not all that well thought out. Just because of the basic problems that we're going to have with the grid and with the lithium issues with regard to batteries. There are a lot of issues out there. Something like this, the electricity is being used right here. It doesn't have to be sent any distance. So it would seem like to a layperson, a project like this could be one of the things that would make sense, even if some of the other aspects of, say, the Green New Deal do not make sense in the long run. So I don't know whether staff knows anything about this or looked into that particular comment. I thought it was interesting, though.
I did read the comment, but I don't have any specific comments to that other than there was a comment in there about how cities develop, transportation, land use planning. So anytime the cities can get higher densities, get people out of their cars and walking and biking. And I think that's something that the city of Fitchburg is working towards, is a good thing.
Okay. Are there any other comments, questions on this?
I just feel I support it 100%. I feel that it provides a pretty good buffer. As all of you know, I've been in favor of purchase of land development rights. Well, this might be a way to buffer and to keep the ag land, and a good separation between the urban area and the ag land. And so I support it 100%.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
So that was a motion to approve CU 2476-22 with the 8 conditions as noted by staff.
Correct.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Mark?
I was.
Okay, thank you. I apologize.
Fine.
Great. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the final item that we've got is consideration of resolution R200-22, which is approval of farmland preservation plan map and adoption of Dane County Farmland Preservation Plan. I'll let staff take this one.
Sounds good. Thank you. Bringing this back after last meeting with some changes to the map. So I'll just, I plan to give a quick update and overview on the process for this plan update, and then describe a few of the map updates that have been done since the last meeting, and then answer any questions. So to start with, the process for this, this is kind of the first step in the adoption, the approval and adoption process for that plan, the proposed plan map, and the Dane County Farmland Preservation Plan. So we'll have discussion and action here tonight, and then there's a public hearing and possible discussion and action at Plan Commission later tonight, and then these 2 items would go to the next council meeting next week for kind of final adoption. Dane County is holding a public hearing on their portion of the plan. On November 15th is the currently scheduled date for that. And finally, after it's adopted by the county, it goes to the state for the DATCAP certification. The plan map piece of this, that's the part that we're working with Dane County most closely on, and if it's approved here and at council next week, that would be sent to Dane County to be incorporated into their plan, into their countywide map. So that's kind of the overview of the process going forward for the farmland preservation plan update. Regarding the proposed map that was in the packet, we made some of the changes that we discussed at the last meeting, particularly by the interchange between Highway M and Highway 14. There was a removal of some of the land there that was designated as city center on the future land use map. We made a few other additional changes that kind of maintain consistency with that strategy of taking things out of the farmland preservation area that are designated as non-agricultural uses on the future land use map in our comprehensive plan. So those were areas near the McGaw Park neighborhood for the most part. So those are the main changes since the last meeting. We had a couple that we discussed removing at the last meeting that we did not remove because they are currently identified in our future land use map as agricultural uses in the future. And that's, yes, so that's the South Stoner Prairie. Am I able to share my screen here?
Yep, should be able to.
Yeah. Let's see. So, yeah, let me zoom in here. So the parcels by McGaw Park that I'm talking about are these two parcels here. Yeah, the colors don't show up great on that screen. And then these two here. So they're kind of within the neighborhood, the future development area of the neighborhood, but outside of the urban service area as of now. I'm guessing. Yeah.
So the red line is the line that we're proposing, or the shaded area is what is being?
The red shaded area are the non-farm planning areas on the map, and then the green shaded areas are the farmland preservation areas. The red line is the current urban service area boundary.
Oh, okay.
And the blue lines are the district boundaries for like neighborhood planning areas.
I assume the one to the left. It's on. I assume the one to the left is the ownership of that is the Fay family.
I can't remember the owners, but that could be.
I'm not so sure about that. I think that, but I can find out.
It's from your line. I can't get it. I identify it
That's
more by the.
Bowman, isn't it?
I'm not in the right place. Here. I think it's Bowman.
Okay, that would make sense. Then the one further.
Bowman.
Yeah, okay, then the one further over to the right, where it jogs up. Is that McGaw Park there?
Yeah.
That's McGaw Park right there.
Okay, so those are Stoneman. Those two big ones where the McGraw neighborhood, those are both Stoneman family farms.
Okay. And that has been taken out of the farmland preservation?
Right. Those are, and I think maybe this map would be able to show it a little bit better. Whoa, too far. So the future land use in our comprehensive plan on those shows a mix of non-farm land uses.
Yeah, it does show high density residential, and then also open space, and then medium density residential on our future land use map.
So that would.
And the reason that it does show that is because we've done the McGraw Park neighborhood plan. And after that McGraw Park neighborhood plan was completed, the future land use map reflected the decisions in that McGraw neighborhood plan. Yeah.
Has the Stoneman family been in support of losing that? Because I believe they used the ag land tax credits.
Well, that's a really good question, and we need to check on that.
Yeah.
Because that is an active farm that is farmed by that family.
Okay,
And I know they use, or I believe they use the ag land tax credits.
okay.
I would not want to see us take that away because they have a cattle grazing operation there, plus the sweet corn operation there. And that's one of the few farms that is now totally grazed. So they have gone away from the normal tillage for the erosion control and that. So they're very embedded in agriculture. And the Stoneman farm, the farmer is a young farmer.
Okay.
And we certainly want to support any young farmers in our,
Yeah.
So we can make an amendment to the map to put that back into the farmland pres. That's something that we can certainly do.
well, I'm not speaking for the family, but they should certainly have some input into it if they have not already, so.
What are the repercussions of leaving it in if that were then to change at some point? I know we talked about this again last time, just so that we're all clear.
The biggest thing that I can think of is that the criteria that Dane County sets, which has to be uniform across the county, to include something as a farmland preservation area, is that it's not expected to see development for, I think, 20 years is the time frame. Now, if that were to develop prior to that 20-year boundary, I think it would mean that we have to go through an amendment process on the farmland preservation plan. I don't necessarily think that's a huge deal, but I think that would be the biggest issue is if the biggest issue I think would be if it's inconsistent with the requirements for it to be designated farmland preservation in the Dane County Farmland Preservation Plan. So,
And would there be some requirement of some of those benefits, some of the tax benefits that they would have to pay back then?
I'm not sure about the individual tax requirements on that. I could reach out to somebody at DATCAP to see if there would be a payback requirement for those tax benefits. I think there's an agreement, a farmland preservation agreement that's signed that specifies the number of years, and I imagine those would have the terms if it were taken out of that before that agreement was termed. So, but I can double check to be sure with DATCAP.
Well, if the landowner is actively farming and wants to stay in that, I think we would be out of line to take it out.
Sure.
Mark, do you know who's at this point making the decisions?
John is, John and Kevin and Mary.
John, Kevin, and Mary. Okay.
Kevin operates the entire land.
Kevin operates it, and John and Mary and Kevin are making the decisions. I'm just wondering if there's anyone that can be reached out to prior to the Plan Commission meeting.
Yeah, I have the numbers.
Okay.
So,
right.
John would probably be,
I would assume it would be John, yeah.
would be the best to get an answer.
Okay. All right. So let's I think the recommendation here is that we put that back into ag land preservation. Any other questions or thoughts with regard to the map?
That doesn't, when you talked about the tax benefits, that doesn't reflect the ag enterprise areas? Is that the terminology?
So the
I mean,
land that's in an ag enterprise area is, I believe, eligible for additional, above the base 750 an acre credit. If it's also in an ag enterprise area, the credit amount can be, per acre can be higher.
okay.
But I don't believe we have any AEAs in Fitchburg.
Yeah, I just remember that term. I wasn't sure about how many, if we had any issues about that.
Yeah, I don't think there are any. I think the town of Dunn has some, just to the east, but I don't believe Fitchburg has any AEAs here that provide. I think it goes up to $12 an acre if it's farmland preservation zoning and in an AEA. So.
Yeah, and I would support 100% reaching out to Kevin Waterman and the Stallman family, though, because they're longtime family farmers there.
Okay.
Do they own the property across Sain Road also that's kind of within that blue, or outside of the blue line? I mean, the blue line kind of cuts across there. I don't, the blue line.
Okay, so across Sain and the railroad tracks, that would be just to the south of Partong, and that's the Haas
Haas family,
Revocable Living Trust.
ASS, yeah.
Yep, AAS.
Brian and Brian. So their land is staying in ag, or is that coming out?
Yeah, if I'm on the right parcel here, that's staying in.
That should stay in because that's actively farmed by Brian.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's not rented, that's actually farmed by Brian.
okay.
And I think the other one that there was a question about that we talked about at the last meeting was, trying to get control of the zooming here. This area around the South Stoner Prairie neighborhood, we decided to keep that in the agricultural preservation area because it is still noted as agricultural future land use in the future land use, or in the comprehensive plan.
That's the Richardson parcel.
Yeah, so that's this area here. And of course, with an upcoming neighborhood plan there, that could be more fully fleshed out, and whatever recommendations come out of that neighborhood plan would be incorporated into the comprehensive plan when it's completed. Yeah, and then we could amend this as that whole process, as part of that whole process. So,
Very good, thank you.
Any other questions?
We have a motion on this?
Motion to approve Resolution R-200-22. Is there conditions at all?
No.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. I think that's pretty much it for tonight. Any report from the planning department?
Yeah, I have an update on, I think there were a couple questions asked about Lake Barney last time, so
Yes.
I talked a little bit more with Lauren at the Village of Oregon, and they have in their CIP, the Lerner Park improvements currently scheduled for construction in 2024, and the Cusick Park or the Cusick improvements in 2025. So that's kind of their expected construction timeline. And in Fitchburg CIP, the construction is in the CIP for 2025 for Fitchburg portion of it.
So the Lerner portion is 2024,
Yeah,
and the Cusick portion is 2025.
right.
So then that assumes that by 2024, they'll have an answer from DNR.
Yeah.
in the learner
yeah.
portion.
Yeah, she said they're expecting wetland delineation in 2023, design and permitting in 2024. Or sorry, that's ours, actually. I think theirs was 1 year. I think they were going to finish the wetland delineation. It's basically, 2 years ahead for the wetland delineation and then 1 year ahead for the design permitting.
So they would be 2020, sometime, they would be this year for the wetland
For
delineation?
parts of it, I think, if I remember her email correctly.
Okay, so if the wetland delineation is done this year, that means that that information goes to DNR and they can start to make a decision.
Yeah, and then the design and permitting pieces can move ahead.
And then it's another year before the construction would occur, assuming that all happens.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I also was able to get, I probably could have mentioned this during the farmland preservation item, but was able to get some information from DATCAP on the number, like tax credits that are claimed in here. So total in Dane County is $1.4 million of tax credits claimed, farmland preservation tax credits. In Fitchburg specifically, there are 16 claims by residents of Fitchburg. The DOR data that DATCAP uses is by where the tax, where the claimant resides, not where they are farming. So that doesn't necessarily mean the land is in Fitchburg, but I'm working with Dane County to get some additional data that might help us figure out how many of those are actually farming or own land in Fitchburg. But 16 claims by residents of Fitchburg covering 1,900 acres, and it's just over $14,000 in credits in 2020. So that's the additional information I've been able to track down so far.
Great, thank you. Any announcements? Do we know whether there will be a need for a November meeting? Is there anything coming up that we're aware of?
There is nothing that I am aware of. I
Okay.
do not expect a November meeting.
Okay, so we'll assume we're out until December then, anyhow.
I would assume so.
Yep.
And
Okay.
we'll see about December. But we'll be in touch.
Deanna, will mine have to come back here?
Yes,
Then there probably will be
in December.
a November meeting, I would think, because we'll work on that. We'll talk about that.
Okay, we'll talk about that.
Okay, so there may be a November meeting, okay. All right, motion for adjournment?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting's adjourned, thank you.